this sort of gets into your second book, How Evil Are Politicians. And
Mhm.
I like this because this is, I've, again, all thought sort of the same way. I mean, your argument is that, if you have a lot of power and you don't exercise due diligence to find out, like, whether what you're saying or what you're advocating for, what you're doing, makes any sense, then yeah, you're evil. I mean, I think that's a
Mhm.
fine definition. Like, if the definition of evil is you have to, like, want to sadistically torture people, I think
Mhm.
that's gonna not gonna apply to many people. Um, it's broader than politicians, though, right? Because it
Mhm.
also applies to, say, journalists or activists,
Mhm.
right? Because a
Mhm.
lot of activists, I'd say, well, the vast majority, don't seem to do any kind of cost benefit analysis when they
Mhm.
advocate for whatever they want. Are they also are they also evil? Is everyone who pays attention to politics basically evil, except a small minority? I guess is that the implication of your book?
There are degrees. So, I mean, I do pick on the politicians because they have so much power. And, even if you're just a city councilman, still, normally that's billions of dollars and and as well as human freedom. You're passing laws, people go to jail for breaking these laws. So I'll put very high moral responsibility on them. But yeah, but also for journalists or activists, people that are influential, it's a sliding scale. Right. And then I'm also very happy to make your usual common sense adjustments for I'm not going to hold a 14-year-old to the same standard of a 40-year-old. 14-year-old is still just figuring things out. And when they say something ridiculous, it's like, all right, well, maybe the kid has never actually even heard the objections yet. So give him a break. 40-year-old's like, all right, I think you're old enough that you should have figured this out by now. And you haven't. And yeah, like what you're doing is quite bad. Not as bad as locking up hundreds of thousands of people for smoking marijuana or something like that, but nevertheless, it was pretty bad. Yeah, so yeah, I think a lot of journalists. I think it's fair to say that they really should have thought a lot harder about what they were saying and not just gone with the ideology of other people around them. Just the general point of if you look at almost any other human society throughout history, and as an outsider, you can see, wow, they were doing some really bad stuff. And people should have thought harder about whether what they were doing was okay. And then to think, well, but in our society, I don't need to bother doing that. Our society is so good, I can just default to assuming that what we do is fine. It's like how would you imagine that's true? That the idea that like you just got so lucky, you're in the one society in history with clean hands. Come on, I mean, you might say there's some ways in which society is better, but just to say it's like I don't need to go and second guess what's popular in the society, right? Evolutionarily, of course, it's pretty obvious why people don't put much effort into this. Like questioning what go of the popular views in your society gets you pushed off a cliff if you're in a primitive society. But still, say, yeah, well, you're not going to get pushed off a cliff now, so you really should try harder to think before you speak.
Yeah. So I mean, a lot. When I read you and I listen to a lot of people. Who write and sort of people who are like rationalists who try to be good faith understanders of other people and try to weigh the relative merits of ideas. They often have this habit of steel manning, consciously
Mm-hmm.
steel manning the opponent. And I've always thought, okay, that's like sort of good to do as an intellectual exercise. I
Mm-hmm.
worry that if you're so used to steel manning, often you get a distorted sense of your opponents. Like the steel
Oh
man,
yeah.
you start to think too highly of them. So it's like I could steel man like some person who's going to want some intervention in the labor market, and it's very easy to convince myself like, okay, this is what they would do. But if that's not the accurate view, then if that
Mm-hmm.
person has power or influence, they're going to do the stupid thing. So you don't want a steel man, you don't want a straw man,
Mm-hmm.
right? You want a
Right.
steel man for understanding, but for practicality, you want an accurate view of your opponents, right?
Yeah, so I have an essay. I'm not sure if it's actually in How Evil Are Politicians or if it's going to be another book, but it's called The Straw Man, Straw Man. And it says, look, there's a lot of arguments that are in fact popular among advocates of a view that are very foolish. And to go and attack those arguments is not attacking a straw man because it's not some stupid argument that is not actually believed by your opponents that you foist upon them. You're actually listening carefully and saying they really said it. So I'm going to respond to the argument they really said rather than the argument that they should have said. So yeah, I mean, it's like steel manning is indeed like a great thing to train yourself doing, but also it should not supplant actually listening to real human beings that disagree with you to get an idea of what's going on inside of their heads. I mean, I found often the smartest people have the very poorest understanding of what most people think. because they really just can't imagine the level of impulsive folly that most people subscribe to. I mean, this is a argument that I've had with Robin Hanson for decades, where Robin says, well, I mean, what's really going on is that liberals are more concerned about adverse selection and conservatives are more concerned about moral hazard. And I say, like, Robin, neither of those groups, like 98, 95% of the people in those groups have never heard of either of these things you're talking about. And this has nothing to do with how they form their views at all. And he's like, well, then what is it? I say, well, first of all, not that. And then second of all, let's go and actually listen to some of them and not just the best, not just the very smartest representative of the view. Go and listen to some real people with this. And honestly, I will say that if firsthand experience plays any role in my thought, it's the firsthand experience of arguing with my own dad, who is a very frustrating person to talk to. As far as I know, he's never read anything I've written. Right? And he really does just let his anger be his muse for every issue. Like, who am I angry about? Like, that's the problem. Right? So, he is the angriest anti-immigration person that I personally know, probably. And it's not that he has, it's not that he has some subtle arguments. It's just the most simple-minded arguments. And my dad is a very smart guy. He's got a PhD in electrical engineering. Out of all the people I know, I think he might be most capable of getting me alive off of a desert island if I was stranded with him. He's very practical. He knows how to build things, fix things, make things. But in terms of the world of ideas, he takes that intellect and he just turns the dial down to zero, pretty much.
Yeah, and this is not mysterious either. I mean, it's the incentive problem. It feels good to it feels good to hate someone. It feels good to indulge in this stuff. And
I mean, one of my favorite conversations with my dad, or most illuminating, I was explaining the idea of betting markets to him. And then I say, like, for example, you could have a betting market on will the Iraq war increase terrorism or reduce terrorism measured by number of deaths? And he heard all this. He goes, yes, but I want to invade them. We're going to invade them. What will your betting market get me? Basically, for him, the only thing a betting market could possibly do is to veto his victory that he's already achieved. So what's the point? Like, well, the point is to find out whether the policy that you're pushing for these reasons actually is likely to achieve those. But that was just not on his mind at all. It was, look, I know what I want to happen. And don't try to confuse me with, it's unclear whether this will work. Like, it's the tool that really is what he wants to apply. It's not what the tool builds. When we're talking politics, of course, when he's repairing antique automobiles, he's all business.
Yeah, I mean, so it's a very pessimistic view of humanity. I mean, it's one that I share too. It's like, it's like the politics and thinking about public affairs and civic engagement. These are supposed to be noble, right, endeavors, like one of the most noble things people can do. And we like encourage people to. There was a poll I saw somewhere where it said, like, more people felt an obligation to vote than they felt to be informed about any issues. Right? And it's like, wait a minute, like, we prioritize just speaking over, and it's like, it's hard to sell to people. I mean, I think one flip side of this is, people are off. How can we sort of mix into the medicine, some little bit of a sweetener, I guess, for sort of public relations purposes. And I guess it could be along the lines of, look, people are often very, very innovative, smart. They have good instincts when it comes to their personal lives. Not everyone, right? We talk about
God now.
Yeah, not everyone, but in general, yes, most people, even the single mothers, I mean, they're responding to incentives. Like, we don't have any calculate, like, we don't, like, you can say, well, they're in poverty because they had 10 kids rather than, stayed sober and got a job. But, like, who knows that would be a happier life? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe having 10 kids and living on welfare is, as long as they're not going to starve, maybe that is the sort of happiness maximizing direction, even though it looks bad, in a database or whatever. So it's like, yeah, humans are dumb. Yes, humans are very smart. Yes, it's just incentives. It's incentives all the way down, and you just have to sort of keep drilling this into people's heads. Is that sort of the best message to take to the public, to the rest of the public, that, like, me or you might have a little bit more of an inclination to social desirability bias?
I guess my main reaction is, most people are actually very politically apathetic. They don't really care very much about this stuff. And as a result, I don't judge them very harshly for their foolish views about it because it's not really something that they are doing anything much about or thinking about. And instead, I try to focus on, well, what are they doing with their lives? So, like, honestly, like, I like almost everybody. Like, I mean, I like some people I get bored with after a while, but like, there's almost no human being that I don't enjoy talking to for 5 minutes, at least. During COVID, the isolation was just killing me. I mean, like I
Okay,
was
so
saying,
so yeah, that
the older I get, the more I enjoy just talking to almost anybody and just finding out what's going on with their lives. And most people are not political fanatics who are trying to go and ram their silly views down your throat. They barely even care about it. So that
but
is why I
that
call it
works for the
how evil are
majority.
politicians rather than how evil are human beings. So the same way that politicians, I think, have a very high moral responsibility for due diligence because they have so much power. I also say most people don't have much responsibility for it because they have basically no power at all.
Yeah. I like that. I like that. So you don't judge people too harshly for their politics because their politics are about as
Mm-hmm.
morally relevant as their opinion on what's their favorite flower or something. It's
Mm-hmm.
just it has no meaning for the rest of the world. It is a harsh
Right.
judgment though on politicians and the activist class. I mean, it's not a
Oh, yeah.
you say it's politicians are the worst, but it's like a lot of people care about politics or
Mm-hmm.
tweeting about all the day or have a really emotional state, even if they're not doing anything. I mean, they wish they had the power to do a lot of things. That's a quite substantial portion of
Yeah.
the population. So you do have to have just an extremely your worldview, and I think my worldview is just it's like the dimension of like how negatively you view like people
Mm-hmm.
involved in politics. It's like we're at the maximum end of like bad morally and intellectually, right? I mean,
You,
there's no there's sort of no
you could
avoiding
definitely
that.
go further, but yes.